Inventions and technology are responsible for all real per capita increases in wealth and income. I think this quote from economist Jacob Schmookler is appropriate here. Unfortunately, neoclassical as well as classical, as well as Austrian economics, seems better adapted to the analysis of replication than to that of technological change. The vast economic changes since the Stone Age, or for that matter during the recent centuries in the West, were only possible because of technological progress. What Schmookler is pointing out here is that the economics profession has been focused on the trivial, while ignoring the elephant in the room. I'm afraid that Jacob Schmookler's contempt for his fellow economists is not great enough. As Millet has pointed out, all of neoclassical economics is wrong. I think these two quotes from Millet reinforce the points that Schmookler is making. When one begins to think about economic growth, one can never think about anything else. Millet also said, "I'm going to specialize in economic growth, and they can all go to hell." To understand where real per capita increases in wealth and income come from, we first have to understand the nature of man. The first thing that any real scientist studying economics should notice is that humans are the only species to have escaped the Malthusian trap. The fact that this isn't widely known or widely discussed among economics professionals shows the bankruptcy of the whole profession. So what is it about humans that allowed them to escape the Malthusian trap? Well, the most obvious answer is that humans are the only rational animals. We use our reason to create things, and we are the only living species to create things continuously. Everything that humans create can be divided into two categories: art and inventions. Arts are those things that have a subjective result. Inventions are those things that we create that have an objective result. If you understand logic, this is the complete universe of all human creation. By the way, replication is not creation. Why do we create inventions? We create inventions in order to gain more energy, such as food and housing. If humans didn't create things, we'd be just like every other species. We'd be living in the Malthusian trap. The fact that humans create inventions to gain energy is what makes us unique compared to every other species in the world. One of the things that any real scientist would notice if they look at a chart of the GDP per capita versus time is that the GDP per capita versus time takes off around 1800. 1800 is a clear inflection point. Any real scientist would ask, why does this inflection point occur? And why does it occur around 1800? The other thing that you would notice if you were a real scientist and looked into the data is, in fact, the GDP per capita first begins to take off in Great Britain and the United States. William Rosen, author of The Most Powerful Idea in the World, has a very interesting way of illustrating this point. He points to a steam locomotive in the Science Museum in London, known as the Rocket. It was built in the 1820s to transport goods from Manchester to Liverpool. The Rocket incorporates hundreds of inventions. And if you could magically edit out all those inventions created in Italy, Sweden, France, and China, the Rocket would still run. If you did the same thing with inventions created in England, Scotland, Wales, and the United States, the display would be empty. A real scientist would also notice that the British Isles and the United States had the most advanced patent system in the world. In other words, property rights for inventions. They would note that when property rights are enforced in other areas, they have the effect of increasing the output of that particular thing that now has the legally enforceable property rights. For instance, Millet points to the fact that in Argentina, the cattle population was almost completely wiped out until property rights were enforced for cattle. Then the cattle industry took off to become one of Argentina's biggest industries. Unfortunately, patent systems have been and are presently captured by special interest groups, which just use this as a tool of industrial policy to steal the inventions of smaller competitors. So it's clear that inventions are how we increase our real per capita wealth and income. For those socialist and useful idiots who are too stupid to understand patents and copyrights are based on Locke's theory of property, which is that if you create something, you own it. Any idea that you don't own the product of your work is immoral and theft, something that even a kindergartner should understand. Why do I mention technology and inventions? I mention technology because of a thing in economics called convergence. The first person to point out this idea was not an economist, it was a technologist. The idea of convergence, which Millay discusses, is that countries that have fallen behind technologically and therefore economically can grow faster than countries that have a first world standard of living and technology, who have to first invent new technologies to grow. Examples include Japan after World War II, the Asian tigers, and China. But unfortunately, most of them don't wake up to the fact that they need to invent themselves once they begin to catch up economically. As a result, they reach a plateau economically, as Japan did in the late 80s, and China is doing today. These countries never set up systems to protect inventors or encourage inventions. To the extent that they have a patent system, it almost certainly is like Japan's, which was an industrial policy to allow large corporations to steal the technology of startups and small inventors. This idea of convergence is part of why Millay knows that Argentina can grow very fast in the next 20 to 30 years. Why do other countries that have fallen behind not follow the path of convergence? Because they have stupid industrial policies like tariffs to protect infant industries. This absurd policy is promoted by a number of economists. Not only does new growth theory make it clear we should not have tariffs or other barriers to bring in new technologies if we want our country to grow fast, but in fact, it's inconsistent with the idea of freedom and capitalism generally. As Millay points out, it's a clear violation of freedom of association. Despite the fact that socialists try to point out examples where it's worked, there's actually no empirical evidence that tariffs have ever done what they suggested and helped protect infant industries until they got on their feet. They become just another crony socialist tool for people already in power. Millay's understanding of new growth theory and convergence makes him unique among economists, whether he's an Austrian or not. And it's one of the reasons that I love Millay and know he will be highly successful. Long live freedom, damn it.